The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
You are now tuned in to the PA Power Podcast, College Edition, featuring Mason Beckman and Tristan Warner. PA Power Wrestling. PA Power Wrestling. Pennsylvania is wrestling.
Pennsylvania wrestling fans, you are now dialed in to the PA Power Wrestling Podcast College Edition, and that is a bit of a mouthful, but that's why we are glad that Jason Bryant, the voice of wrestling these days, provided us with such a nice, catchy, automated message to intro this one up. I'm your co-host, Tristan Warner, and I'm joined by a man who needs little introduction in the wrestling world these days, Mason Beckman, known to everyone around. Couple-time All-American, couple-time state champion. Mason, you won so many titles and so many All-American finishes that I lost track of them. What are you up to these days, Mason?
What's up, Tristan? Like you said, a huge shout out to Jason Bryant for giving us the intro to this, allowing us to do this podcast on his overarching network. In the same vein, Jeff Upson, thank you for having the blind faith in both Tristan and myself to give us this opportunity. But that said, these days, living in the adult world down south of Pittsburgh, just working a regular 9 to 5, figuring out the lifestyle that my parents always lived, as well as coaching at the Quest School of Wrestling, the club that I grew up wrestling in. So, still involved on the coaching side now. And then obviously just as a huge wrestling fan for all things Pennsylvania, all things, Lehigh, my alma mater, as well as just all things wrestling. What about yourself, brother? What are you doing these days?
Like you said, I've gotten into the coaching world myself. I'll be an assistant coach at my alma mater, Cumberland Valley, next year. So happy to be back in Pennsylvania after spending 7 years. Seemed like a lifetime down at Old Dominion. Loved it down there. Had a great time, but it was ready to come back to Pennsylvania and carry on the tradition of PA Power Wrestling. Like you said, we really got to give a thanks to Jeff Upson, who by the way deserves so much credit for going out on a limb and creating this business from I think the time he said he was a junior in high school maybe, and he's just single-handedly built this thing up. PA Power Wrestling. Even when I was in college at ODU, I'd see the kids walking around in all the high school tournaments with the PA Power shirts, and I followed all the social media accounts, and I was like, that's something I really want to be a part of someday. So truly a blessing to be able to have the opportunity to do this. And with you, Mason, who, for the wrestling fans who may not know our background, me and you wrestled together on multiple teams in the summers and in the off season for Wayne Danger and a lot of club teams like that. And, we were always together in the off season. So we've had a long history. It's just an incredible thing to be able to give back to the sport in a way. And just, for Jeff to put his faith, like you said, in two washed-up wrestling nerds like us, you can't really beat this.
No, you're absolutely right. So, just as a quick overview of, our backgrounds, kind of where Tristan and I both came from. Like Tristan touched on a little bit earlier, we're both obviously Pennsylvania natives. I grew up at Reynolds High School, about an hour north of Pittsburgh, drive until the road ends and then go a few more miles, and you might wander your way into Reynolds School District. But won a couple of state titles for them, and then was given the opportunity by Pat Santoro and company out at Lehigh to compete for the Mountain Hawks, and was a 2-time All-American for that program, and, was a really fun opportunity. It was really happy, and it meant a lot to me to stay in the state of Pennsylvania and continue to fly the colors of my college years. So, now on the other side of it, more on the media side, which is hard to believe for me. We're back looking at college wrestling again. So, Tristan, you want to run down a little bit of where you came from, how you got to where we are?
Yeah, definitely. Always lived in Pennsylvania, grew up in the Philly area, wrestled around there until I was about 8. Ended up moving into the State College area. I wrestled for State College in middle school and elementary school, and then just before high school, we moved to Cumberland Valley in Mechanicsburg. So that's where my family still lives to this day. Got to wrestle for Cumberland Valley for Dave Heckard, who I'll now be coaching with. So that's a great opportunity. Give back to the team that I wrestled for in high school. Just finished second in the state one time, only a one-time state medalist, but then ended up going down to Old Dominion, down in Norfolk, Virginia. I got to wrestle for Steve Martin and Mike Dixon, a couple other guys. Those are some of my favorite guys to this day, great coaches, and absolutely blessed to have that opportunity to wrestle for those guys. And like I said, down there for 7 years, actually. Spent my last 2 after my eligibility ran out as a sports information director. So I was actually on the media side, got to go to all the wrestling matches and got to go to all the NCAA championships, the MAC championships, everything like that, and was actually the media guy for our team. So I was writing the articles and, taking pictures, doing interviews, stuff like that. So a real nice transition into something like this where I can be on the media side, but still, get my feet wet in coaching and giving back to the sport. So it's really, really come full circle, you could say.
Yeah, absolutely. So, having said that, why don't we dive right on into it? Some of the things that we're going to go through today, you got University Nationals over in Akron. It took place about a month ago now. We'll run through all the Pennsylvania natives, both at the university level as well as the Junior World Team Trials, which took place in Lincoln, Nebraska just a few weeks ago. So we'll transition into the Junior World Team Trials, talk about some of the Pennsylvania college guys, both natives and guys that wrestle for Pennsylvania schools. Carry that over into the World Team Trials, which were also in Lincoln, Nebraska, right next to the Junior World Team Trials. We'll talk about any of the Pennsylvania college guys that got the chance to compete out there on the senior level. We actually do have one World Team rep as a Pennsylvania native who also competes for Pennsylvania University. From there, we'll get more into the folk style side of things, some guys to watch coming off a Redshirt or maybe just not in the lineup these past few years, as well as we'll have a couple of special guests, Dalton Macri and Kellan Stout, both Pennsylvania natives, both Pittsburgh area natives, as a matter of fact. We'll bring both of those guys in, talk about what they've been up to. They both have some big news. Both of those guys have transferred programs in the last few weeks. So we'll talk to them, get a little bit of insight on what they've been up to, what drove their decision, and how they feel about their opportunities moving forward with their respective new programs. And from there, we'll wrap up with which teams in Pennsylvania look to be poised for a big season. Obviously beyond the one out there in State College that I can't seem to remember the name of at the moment. But we'll wrap up with where we see Pennsylvania college wrestling headed this coming year. And hopefully you guys will enjoy this long, winding, and probably wacky ride.
Yeah, Mason, speaking of Penn State, I'll jump in here real quick and help Jason Bryan out. I've seen him frantically tweeting and Facebook posting over the last few days about how that article circulating on social media that you all might be seeing about Cael Sanderson joining the newly reinstated Oregon wrestling team as a head coach. I can assure you all that is just a hoax that's been going around the internet. That is not to be taken seriously whatsoever. It's pretty funny. I saw JB on there anxiously tweeting and making sure people knew that was not a real thing. Do not believe Cael Sanderson is leaving anywhere. I know his contract expired and they're negotiating it, but you will not see him at Oregon, that's for sure.
Yes. So, having said that, fake news aside, let's dive on into University National results. So, a name that Pennsylvania wrestling fans at all levels, at all ages, I'm sure are very familiar with, for one reason or another, is Chance Marsteller. Chance Marsteller has gone through a bit of a rough couple of years between his time at Oklahoma State and, some things off the mat this last year. But he came back, is competing like crazy recently. He's much more back to the Chance Marsteller that we're used to seeing, a guy that scores lots of points, is just a ton of fun to watch, and quite frankly does a whole lot of winning. So Chance pretty much rolled through the bracket. I don't believe he had any match go the distance. Teched or pinned everybody the whole way to a University National title. Joining him as a Pennsylvania native to win a University National title was Jared Kasnick, who competes for the American Eagles down in Washington, D.C. for Coach Teague Moore, another Pennsylvania native. Another finalist was Pete Renda, a Brandywine Heights native who competes down for Coach Papalizio at North Carolina State. Beyond those three gentlemen that made the finals, there was a pretty large number of guys that, whether they're competing for a Pennsylvania school or are Pennsylvania natives, that competed very well and brought home medals from University Nationals. So we'll kind of touch on each one of them. But again, like I touched on earlier, I think the most obvious place to start is Chance Marsteller. And, Tristan, you and I, he's a guy that we've both wrestled with. Obviously, we grew up a few years. We're a few years older than him, but we grew up right around the same time and kind of got to see his progression. He wrestled on those Wayne Danger teams with us. How about Chance, man? Just getting back on the horse, using wrestling, and really looks like he has things headed in the right direction, which is great to see.
Yeah, Mason, you hit the nail on the head. There's so many things I want to say about Chance. Can't spend the entire hour podcast talking about him, but, this is a guy that's the undisputed, probably best, he's in the conversation, the best ever Pennsylvania wrestler at the high school level, which is a big statement to make. Obviously, we're on the PA Power podcast. We know the prestigiousness of Pennsylvania wrestling. Chance Marsteller, 4-time undefeated state champion, goes off to Oklahoma State, pretty much suck him down, too much weight, and has a rough go, maybe gets into some bad things, transfers to Lock Haven. He wrestled pretty tough last summer in freestyle, had a real tough match with Imar, and you think he's poised for a breakout year, and then, the article comes out, he gets arrested, he gets into some more trouble, and it's just a really sad thing to see that happen, especially for us and people who've known Chance personally. Like you said, he was a 7th grader, mind you, when we were seniors and juniors on the NHSCA duels and Disney and all those, all-star teams in the summer. We'd go out wrestling multiple-time state champs. Even I would take a loss here or there. Chance would still find a way to win. This kid's in 7th grade. It was truly unbelievable to watch and to be a teammate of his in those teams. I had utmost respect for him, even though he was 5 years younger than me, going out there watching him. I think my senior year at NHSCA duels, I think he won 10 or 11-1. I think his only loss came to Luke Fry, who, Mason, you've had your battles with, who's obviously a stud too. But Chance, 7th grader, beating high school state champs from all over the country. He's obviously had incredible talent, and I personally am really excited to see him have such a good performance at University Nationals and in a weight class, not to mention that had 4 other Pennsylvania kids, Ian Brown, Cole Walter, both from Lehigh, and then Josh Shields, who's from Franklin Regional, now wrestling at Arizona State. All of those guys placed in the same bracket. So good for Chance, and for those avid wrestling fans, I'm sure you've already seen it, but there's a great article circulating right now on Flow Wrestling about Chance and really all about his life, his upbringing, and just, the downfall, I guess you could say, and now he's hopefully back on his way up. So I'm really expecting to see big things from him coming in this year, and I really hope we do too.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think Chance has really put himself in a position to succeed, not just in wrestling, but, off the mat, which is exciting to see. So the other Pennsylvania native that won himself a university title was Jarrett Kasnick. Maybe not as much of a household name as Chance, but few are. Kasnick is a Benton, Pennsylvania native, wrestled out there for Russ Hughes. And, he wrestling for the DCAC out of American. Went down and went through a pretty solid bracket at 97 kilos, coming off a red shirt. I believe coming off a red shirt. Kasnick really, put his name out there, had some good wins. And anytime you win a University National title, you make a bit of a statement that you're ready to compete at a high level as the folk style season rolls around in the fall. And, I think Kasnick made that statement loud and clear.
Yep, Kasnick as a kid, my brother, I think, T.C. Warner had some battles with him in high school, at least one, maybe King of the Mountain or one of those tournaments. And it was interesting because I think those two wrestled at 152 or 160 when they were in high school. And the next year I look at the college, the rankings and the lineups, and Jarrett Kasnick's up at 197. Couldn't believe it was the same kid going up that much weight. And I saw him, actually got to watch him wrestle last season at Old Dominion when American came into town, and he pinned one of our guys, and I watched him. I didn't even recognize him. He got so tall, and he was so good on top, and he was very impressive to say the least. And so this doesn't surprise me, this result. And like you said, that was a pretty tough weight that he won too. I mean, you got Tom Slay, who's another really good PA kid over at Bucknell. He places 7th, and you got Danny Shade, who was in the blood round this year at 197. That's who he beat in the finals. Ben Darmstadt, Bobby Stevenson. These are household names, especially on the freestyle level. So good for Kasnick. hopefully we see good things coming from him this fall.
Agreed. The other wrestler with Pennsylvania ties that came home with the title was Jordan Cutler, who is not a Pennsylvania native, but he wrestles out at Lehigh University, competed for the Lehigh Valley Wrestling Club at the University Nationals. Cutler looked outstanding. Speaking of guys like Kaznick that really moved up in weight, Cutler went from a 157-pounder to wrestling 80 kilos, which is 176 pounds, out in Akron, and he looked every bit of 80 kilos. He also looked every bit game for it. I don't believe he had a match that lasted the entirety up until the finals, and even in the finals, it was a 10-5 win, which I believe he was up 10-1 at one point. So Cutler, not really sure where he projects next season weight-wise. The Lehigh room's a pretty loaded one in that wheelhouse with Cole Walter, with Ryan Price. All those guys are right in that same wheelhouse, but Cutler, representing a Pennsylvania school, came home with the title. So the fourth finalist with Pennsylvania ties, as mentioned earlier, was Pete Renda, wrestling out of North Carolina State, but as a Brandywine Heights native. We're kind of on a roll here with guys that have exploded in size. Renda, in his high school days, he went from about a 112 to 119 pounder early on, and now he's competing at 86 kilos, which is 189 pounds. Was an All-American at 184 2 years ago before redshirting last year. So it was a good showing for him, with his lone loss being to Miles Martin, who I'm sure most people know, national champion at Ohio State 2 years ago, and All-American last year. Renda had a good win over Ryan Price in the semis. Price, who finished third in that weight at universities, was a round of 12 guy out in St. Louis this past year. So Renda and Price both with good showings in that weight to go along with Dakota Gear and Alexander DeShantis as Pennsylvania natives placing at 86 kilos.
Yeah, and 3 of the 4 of those guys at least I know are double-A guys, so that probably makes you happy, Mason, to see that. You double-A guys, you got Renda, Gear, and Price, all household names in the double-A wrestling circle.
Absolutely. Anytime us AA guys can get some kind of a leg up on the AAA community, we're gonna make sure you're aware of it. Everybody likes to give AA crap, but here we are. We've proven that we can step up and wrestle with the best of them.
Brock Zackerl, add him to the list too. Brookville, if I'm not mistaken, third place at 65 kilos, had a heck of a tournament himself. I think his only loss was to Tommy Thorne, who ended up getting second.
Yeah, and Zackerl, just looking at the results here, beat Earl Hall, who was a 2-time All-American, and I know from personal experience how explosive and dangerous Earl Hall is. Zackerl with a 10-0 tech over him for third. In that same weight at 65 kilos, Nick Zanetta finished sixth. Pittsburgh native, wrestling at Pitt, for the Pitt WC. So good showing both for Zackerl and Zanetta at that weight. One of the more interesting results that I thought was Ethan Lezak. Not so much because of where he finished fifth at 57 kilos, but watching Lezak compete in freestyle, knowing his style, knowing what his strengths are in folk style, is interesting to see him compete in freestyle.
I agree. He's a guy who's obviously really good on top, and going into a freestyle tournament like that, never having watched Ethan Lezak wrestle in freestyle, it makes you wonder. Some guys, are more tailored for that freestyle, just the way the points are scored, and you have to wonder sometimes. Lezak, he gets those legs in, and he gets kind of that choke ride and that pull back and all of that kind of stuff, which it makes it harder to do in freestyle maybe because on bottom, in freestyle, the bottom guy's taught to just base out and, glue himself to the mat, whereas in bottom on folk style, you're actually trying to get out, and that's what's allowing the momentum to come back. Because as a guy who wrestled the same way on top, just clearly not as good, freestyle was never my strong suit. So watching Lezak wrestle, yeah, you're right. It was interesting going into it, but a fifth place finish at that weight's still pretty solid, I would say.
Oh, it's absolutely a great finish. The guys that finished up above him with Welch and Terrell and Sean Russell competing for Edinburgh took fourth in that bracket. Austin Miller, another Pennsylvania native wrestling for Lock Haven, finished seventh. So that was all the weights at University Nationals. If you're placing in one of those weights, there's no way you're going to say that a guy didn't deserve it, this, that, or the other thing. If you placed at one of those weights, even if it wasn't what that individual guy expected to come home with that day, that was still a pretty good performance.
Yep, there's tons of good wrestlers at universities. We both know we've wrestled in it multiple times. It's not a tournament where you can just show up, and if you haven't been training or you haven't been on the top of your game, you don't know the ins and outs of freestyle, you're going to get exposed. So it's always interesting to see the results. Guys like Dean Heil, and two-time NCAA champ now, doesn't even place. You got a guy like Robbie Mathers, who was, even though he was an NCAA qualifier, clearly no slouch. He's not a household name, but he goes out and wins the thing and pretty much dominates everyone. So University Nationals is always interesting, and it always brings out some surprising results, to say the least. But with that said, we'll move on to Junior World Team Trials and the Senior World Team Trials, which happened just a couple weeks later out in Lincoln, Nebraska, as you touched on. And Mason, I'll let you start with this one. I believe he might have been a teammate of yours for a year. You guys might have just missed each other, but Jordan Wood, I believe for the second straight year, makes the Junior World Team Trial Finals. He's a Boyertown native, by the way, out of Pennsylvania, but loses 2 straight to Gable Steveson, who's the pound-for-pound number 1 heavyweight, in the number 1 wrestler at any weight, but also number 1 high school wrestler at heavyweight in the country.
Yeah, Jordan Wood. We did miss each other as far as actually being on the same team, but Jordan's a kid. Boyertown's not far from Lehigh. I spent a lot of time around Jordan. He committed fairly early. Spent a lot of time training at our RTC with the likes of Zach Ray and Doug Valero and Max Wessel. So I know Jordan pretty well. He had a great performance. He had some very high quality wins. Runs into a bit of a roadblock in Gable Steveson. That kid right now seems to be on a different level than everybody. Even you go back to the way he competed at the World Championships last year. Gable really has shown to be progressing at an almost alarming rate, let alone for a high school kid. But Jordan looked great. I know for a fact that he's excited, that the Lehigh staff is excited about how he projects, about what the future holds at heavyweight for the Mountain Hawks out there. Another high finisher for a Pennsylvania native was Hayden Hidlay. Finished second in the challenge tournament, lost to Alex Marinelli, Ohio native, Iowa wrestler now, in the challenge tournament finals. Hidlay is very much in the Isaiah Martinez vein of things. He tries to solve life's problems one underhook at a time. But he looked great. Marinelli is such a great hand fighter. It's a hard matchup for Hayden. But all in all, I'm sure that those guys down there in Raleigh are excited about what they saw out of him. And, again, putting yourself in a position to wrestle in the world, the finals of the challenge tournament of World Team Trials, that's a pretty good accomplishment in and of itself.
Definitely. I got to say, Hayden's another kid I've known pretty much since the time he probably started wrestling. We used to, me, him, his brother, my brother, we used to all wrestle for the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club back in elementary school. I think Hayden was probably like 5 years old back then when he just got on the mat. And ironically, we were talking about Luke Pletcher as well, going 3-2 at the tournament. Those two used to have some battles back in the day. That was always the rivalry. I remember Hayden would come back into practice at NLWC after him and Pletcher would just have wrestled in like the Mawa Eastern National Finals or something. But always loved watching Hayden wrestle, and I liked his finish here. Obviously, he wrestled really tough. Ran into Marinelli, who's a stud himself. These two came out back-to-back, number 1 or 2 in the country in their weights, 152 and 160 the years before. Marinelli probably a little bigger, definitely a sure 165-pounder for Iowa, but a good finish for Hayden, definitely respectable, and he's going to be a hammer next year. We got a little taste of him at Midlands last year, wrestling at 57, and he's going to be a hammer for North Carolina State next year. And also got to say to all the PA Power fans out there, Hayden Hidlay is an absolute must-follow on Twitter. Any of you have Twitter, or probably all social media in general, definitely go ahead and give him a follow at Hoagie Hidlay. You will not be disappointed.
Coming from a Twitter legend himself in Warren Triz, so that those words right there, that's high praise from a man who knows his social media, who in part majored in social media, well, in communication, all things media, right?
That's correct. Real recognize real is all I got to say for that statement. So Hayden Hidlay, a must follow on Twitter. I think even for our next episode, Mason, I gotta make our podcast stand out in some way, so we're not just talking about wrestling. I think I'm gonna compile a list of the best current PA college wrestlers. Maybe we'll go current and former. I'm not sure, but best guys to follow on social media, at least that I've experienced. So the fans can look forward to that next episode.
I agree, and there's one I already have for sure in my mind, but we'll save that for when the time comes. Perfect. Moving on to the other side of things out there in Lincoln, the senior world team trials. A few Pennsylvania college guys competed out there. We've already talked about Chance Marsteller, so just to touch on him quickly, he finished fourth. His losses were to Alex Dieringer, three-time national champion out of Oklahoma State, Isaiah Martinez, two-time national champ, three-time finalist, still wrestling for Illinois. Had wins over Anthony Valencia, Kevin LaValle, who was a multiple-time All-American of Bucknell. So Chance with another great performance. Just more reason to think that if he continues on this trend and, everything is taken care of and he gets the opportunity to compete at Lock Haven next year, that he's a guy that you could very well see wrestling on Saturday afternoon or even Saturday night at the national tournament.
Definitely. I was impressed to see him. I think it was a 6-1 win over Anthony Valencia in the first round. That was definitely impressive. And then, like you said, beat a couple other really talented guys, some who are even quite a few years older than him on that international and that freestyle circuit. And I think some people forget Dieringer is his old teammate, so those guys used to go at it, I'm sure, in their room. Not that Chance would have beat him either way, but just that was an interesting matchup, I thought, there in the semifinals. But, yeah, definitely a solid finish from Chance. Another guy to look at, Jason Knoll, finished third, only lost to Jimmy Kennedy, which, Mason, I don't know if you watched the match. I didn't quite catch this one, but I know as I was reading back through the box score, it looked like Knoll had a 6-0 lead at one point in that match, and I think Kennedy scored all 7 or 8 of those points that he came back to win that late.
Yeah, and, a match that's kind of, not that Jason Knoll, you ever really see him in a hole to start a match, but if I would have said that there was one of those two guys that would come back from match, exactly. That would really finish a match in the back half of it, I would have said Jason Knoll, and that's not a knock on Jimmy Kennedy. I mean, Jimmy Kennedy has been an extremely high-level wrestler his entire career. He's someone I followed growing up when he wrestled at the University of Illinois. He's made a world team. Kennedy has proven to be, he's a proven commodity. But, yeah, Nolf went out, was rocking and rolling up 6-0, and then, Kennedy, as high-level guys do, made the adjustments and just continued to, little by little, get himself back in the match. I believe there was a 4-pointer in there that took it from 6-0 to 6-4, and all of a sudden, that's one of the beautiful things about freestyle. And, you finish one double leg the right way, you put yourself back in a match. And Kennedy, with the power he has, he got himself through Nolf. And one of the things that I've kind of noticed watching Nolf wrestle freestyle is he does a lot of, unorthodox, funky things when he wrestles folk style as well as freestyle. And it's not that you can't scramble in freestyle, but it looks like Nolf is still, really polishing the edges as far as getting his freestyle legs and all the little interactions and reactions down to what they need to be for freestyle. He still has a little bit too much of an instinct to go into a folk style mode or put himself in a position in folk style that would be advantageous. But in freestyle, especially against a guy like Kennedy, you take a half a step the wrong way, you're going to give up points. And especially on that 4-point shot of Kennedy's, Kennedy got himself up through Nolf, and it looked like Nolf may have had a chance to bail out of it. And again, I think in folk style, that's a position that Nolf may not even give up points. And in freestyle, he just stuck with it a little bit too long. And, I'm sure that with that coaching staff out there in State College with Cale and Cody Sanderson and Coach Cunningham and everybody they have out there, I'm sure Nolf, by the time he graduates college, he'll have those freestyle reactions down pat.
I think you're exactly right about that. Someone like myself, I was kind of a funky wrestler, and freestyle was always a hard transition because, the guy gets in on your leg and your immediate reaction, just your instinct, you're not even thinking about what style am I wrestling, is just to, do a leg pass or do some kind of roll, and before you know it, you look up at the score and you're down 6-0. Jason Nolf, you probably remember that video on Flow that was circulating that everyone was oohing and ahhing over when that Bethea from Penn hit that double and he just does a side cartwheel, front roll, somersault, whatever. Looked like he could have been on the Olympic gym team with that. gymnastics team and found a way to get a takedown of his own. Nolf, he does those kind of moves just instinctively, and not to say that he went out and hit a forward roll against Jimmy Kennedy, but when, that play wrestling that Penn State does, they're used to just rolling, and it definitely seems like Nolf is still, he's going to be a little more polished, I think, in a few years down the road, like you said, when he gets more of a freestyle mentality and under his belt. Yeah,
agreed. Another Pennsylvania guy that competed out at the Senior World Team Trials, Darian Cruz, national champ out at Lehigh, finished 1-2. Lost a couple of tough ones, to Gilman, who put a great tournament together, took himself from losing to Cruz at the NCAA tournament, and Gilman runs the whole way through everybody and ends up making the world team. His other loss was to Frank Pirelli, former All-American at Cornell, who's actually has recently signed on to be one of the athletes out, the senior level athletes out at Lehigh. So that's interesting. I'm sure Cruz and Pirelli will get their fair share of scraps in the room in the weeks and months to come. He did have a win over Nashawn Garrett, former national champion out at Cornell, who's now training out at Arizona State. So Cruz, even at 1-2, I know that's not what Darian wanted to finish with, but did some great things. And as good as all those guys are, nothing's ever guaranteed. A win over Nashawn Garrett is a very, very high-level win, and I'm sure Cruz, along with Coach Santoro, Coach Hughes, and everybody out there in the Lehigh Valley, by the time we see him compete next, I'm sure he'll be even better for it.
Agreed. Darian Cruz, fresh off a national title, beating Gilman, who you just mentioned, beat him here in the first round, I believe it was, at the World Team Trials. But, a solid finish for Cruz either way, just to even be on that level, competing with those guys. And like you said, a win over Nashawn Garrett's never a bad thing to have. Moving on, also, Zane Rutherford, probably the last guy we wanted to touch on here. Obviously, the big name of this bunch, makes the senior world team, wins the best 2 out of 3 against his former coach, Frank Molinaro. 3 actually really good matches between those guys. It was interesting to watch that match, I think. Really, all of those World Team Trial finals, I think, a lot of people have been saying this, and I think I would agree that might have been the best night of wrestling I've ever watched in my 21 years watching the sport. Every single match pretty much was really good to watch, really interesting. Zane and Molinaro was interesting because these two have wrestled so many times, and it was interesting to see if they switched up their styles or anything. I think even Zane said in his post-match interview, like, these guys have wrestled so many times, he knows what I'm going to do, I know what he's going to do, that type of thing. And it seemed to me like Molinaro, those last 2 matches at least, wrestled a lot more physical against Zane than I've ever seen him wrestle before. I mean, he was downright clubbing him hard in the head and nearly headbutting him. It was fun to watch, don't get me wrong. I loved it. I think the sport needs that. The fans loved it for sure. But it was just cool to see a different style, maybe from these guys making adjustments who have wrestled each other so many times.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, one of the most interesting things to me about that 2 out of 3 series between Zane and Molinaro was the fact that, Zane going through the challenge tournament after the whole to-do about, with Jordan Oliver being removed and Molinaro getting to sit in the finals, Zane goes through the challenge tournament, and as that 2 out of 3 progressed against Molinaro, it really looked to me like Zane is actually the one that wore Frank out, which you almost never see it work out that way. It's almost always, if you look at the Burroughs-Dake series, if you look at the Taylor-Jaden Cox series, it's almost always the guy that sat in the finals. If it goes to 3 matches, little by little, you'll see the guy that had to come through the challenge tournament fade a little bit. And Zane, it was just like, it was almost, you ever see the movie Highlander, man? It's like every point he scores, he gets stronger and stronger. He absorbs more and more with every win he got. And to watch Zane come through the challenge tournament and then win, let alone, not just win 2 out of 3 against Frank, but to lose the first one back against the wall and then reel off 2 in a row. And like I said, he just got stronger and stronger and stronger as the day progressed. So that was incredible. To be able to do that against guys that good, it speaks a lot, not only to Zane's skill level and toughness level, But mental toughness, that's a huge part of that, to really reset the mindset and just keep coming back and continuing to try to find the next point.
Absolutely. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe what Zane did against Molinaro was the same thing that Molinaro did against Aaron Pico in the Olympic team trials finals, whenever that was 2 years ago. I believe Pico took the first match, and then Molinaro had his back against the wall, and he looked like he wore Pico down. He kept hitting that chest wrap and the head pinch and just kept scoring points there, and found a way to make an Olympic team like that. So Zane does the opposite here and gets the final 2 of 3 against Molinaro.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see how Zane does out at the Senior World Championships. We've seen him compete. We've seen him win a world title at the cadet level before. You mentioned Pico. After that cadet world title, Pico was the roadblock in Zane's career as far as continuing to make world teams and continuing to win world medals and titles. Pico, obviously, we all know, went out every time he made a team and competed well and represented the United States well. So I'm excited to see Zane back on a world team, especially internationally. I think Zane's style is really going to give people problems. How heavy his hands are, his pace. When he attacks, his attacks are clean. He gets up and through guys. He's just downright mean on top. So I think he's a guy that, even as a, 21, 22-year-old college kid, I think has a very good chance to go do some serious damage out in Paris.
Yep, we've seen that as a trend lately. I mean, you got Kyle Snyder, Jaden Cox. These guys are still in college, and they're going out there, and, Snyder wins it. Cox gets bronze and, could have won that weight class at the Olympics. So I would not at all be surprised if Zane goes out there and just does what we're used to seeing Zane do. We've grown accustomed to watching him just dominate the NCAA. The sky's the limit for him. And with that, we've talked a lot about the recent freestyle wrestling. Let's turn our gear to folk style coming up. We have a lot of guys listed here. Mason, maybe we'll each pick a few just to talk about briefly that we think will really make an impact next year in the fall. These are guys that most of them redshirted, some of them just not in the lineup last year, but a lot of these guys are Lehigh guys, so I'll save some of them for you. Mason, you probably have better insight than I do. Chance Marsteller, obviously, we talked about him a lot. Will we see him next year for Lock Haven? According to that Flow Wrestling article that I referenced earlier in the podcast, it does sound like he will be enrolled and eligible in the spring semester starting in January, at least per that article. We'll see. If he is, definitely, I think, an All-American contender. Who knows? The sky's the limit for him at 165, most likely, for the Bald Eagles. Another guy on this list I really like, obviously we talked about Hayden Hidley for NC State. He's a given. Chris Weiler, I'll steal one of your Lehigh guys. He's a guy that grew up wrestling at my club, actually, Iron Eagle, just out here in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. He's a guy who's really improved through the years. Even when he was a kid, he was tough, but when he got to high school, went over to Wyoming Seminary and was a stud in high school, was placing and winning the big tournaments, Beats of the East, Iron Man, got himself ranked really high, placing at Fargo, all those kinds of things. And I got to watch him at a few opens this year, all the way up at 184 now, I think he is, Midlands, and he's really good on top, really long. He's got a really filthy cradle. Chris Weiler's definitely one to watch next year for Lehigh.
Yeah, and to continue on that trend, some more Lehigh guys. Jordan Wood, we've talked about, projects at heavyweight. Luke Karam, a 3-time state champ out of Bethlehem Catholic, Bethlehem native, stayed at home, went to Lehigh. He projects in to fill his, high school namesake, Randy Cruz's spot up there at 141 potentially for the Mountain Hawks. Some non-Lehigh guys. You've got, like we talked about, Pete Renda, also down there at NC State, was an All-American, took third up at 184 as a freshman 2 years ago. So it's obviously someone to be excited about coming off a red shirt. Zeke Moisey, I think everybody remembers that run to the NCAA finals Zeke made a few years ago. Has dealt with some injuries and some other problems. Coming off a red shirt, Zeke has always been a kid that is a gamer, comes to wrestle when the lights are the brightest. So excited to see him back in the lineup down there in West Virginia, wrestling for Sammy Henson. A couple other guys, Dalton Macri and Kellan Stout, we've touched on. They're going to be joining us shortly. Dalton now down at the University of North Carolina, wrestling for Pennsylvania native Coleman Scott. Dalton was a national qualifier for Cornell a couple of years ago as a freshman. Last year, unfortunately, was injured in the first period of his first match. So got a medical redshirt out of it. He's going to be coming back, have 3 years of eligibility left for Coach Scott and the Tar Heels down there. Kellan Stout, a state champion out of Mount Lebanon High School, was out of Penn State, battling for a starting spot with McCutcheon out there. McCutcheon wins the spot. Stout, they really went back and forth, and on a good problem to have for Coach Cale Sanderson and company out there, that you have two guys at the level of Kellan Stout and Matt McCutcheon. Kellan transferring home to Pitt. We'll have him on the program here in a few minutes to get his side of, why he felt that that move was the right thing to do. But Kellan Stout, absolutely somebody to be excited about, especially with everything else that's going on at Pitt. Definitely an exciting situation.
Yeah, definitely. For those who may not know, Keith Gavin now the head coach at Pitt. And they also just pulled assistant Jordan Lean out of UVA, who was obviously an NCAA champ for Cornell about 10 years ago. And I believe Connor Utzi now, two-time All-American from Michigan, will also be a volunteer assistant at Pitt. So Pitt's definitely, I think, just as far as a coaching staff, heading in the right direction. You can't really beat any of those guys on the coaching staff. And, yeah, we're looking forward to having Dalton and Kellan here on just briefly in a minute to talk about, their story and what's motivated them to move on and how they're looking for the future. Just to backtrack a second, Mason, you talked about I don't know how I missed talking about Zeke Moisey, but one of my favorite college wrestlers to watch, his NCAA final run, that was my fifth-year senior year, sitting in the bleachers after a devastating loss to end my career, but I honestly can't say that anything lifted my spirits more than watching Zeke's run out there. Not with any disrespect to Gilman or Iowa or anything, but just as someone who was raised to be a PA power guy and a not Iowa power guy. Zeke Moisey going out there and sticking Gilman in 38 seconds or whatever it was, and I don't think I've ever heard an arena that loud in my entire life. Whenever that happened, I don't think I've ever had my heart and blood pumping so heavy as when I watched that. So Zeke Moisey, automatically one of my favorite wrestlers ever to watch. So cannot wait to see him back on the mat. And some of you may or may not have seen or heard about it. He had a fairly gruesome injury that ended his season last year, and this year he took the year off redshirting, but hopefully he's back healthy, and hopefully he's ready to make a run next year. And one last guy I wanted to talk about real quick we have on this list is Caleb Young out of Punxsutawney, a school you don't really hear talked about in terms of Pennsylvania wrestling that often, but this guy was a hammer, won a Pennsylvania state title last season, beat Trent Hidley in the finals, who's obviously going to be one of the top recruits in the nation this upcoming year now. Caleb Young had a pretty good year out at Iowa as a redshirt, placed pretty high at Midlands, but my question is, where is this guy going to fit into the lineup? Because probably a 165-pounder ideally. They got Alex Marinelli at 57. They got Michael Kemmer, another PA kid. So I don't know if we see him bump up to 174, or I don't know what the game plan is for Caleb Young, but regardless, he's really talented.
Yeah, and that's, another situation where you see it programs like a Penn State and an Iowa that, those are good problems to have for those programs. It's a shame that somebody has to sit in those situations, but, iron sharpens iron, and I'm sure that in the room, those guys are going at it as hard as they can. And we've all heard stories of different guys over the years that when they finally got their shot, they made the most of it. So hopefully Caleb Young gets himself into the lineup, and if and when he does, I'm sure we'll see him do a lot of damage. And just to touch on one more thing with these guys coming off a red shirt, Zeke Moisey, you mentioned the match against Gilman in St. Louis a few years ago. For me, that's a memory I'll never forget, and I didn't even see the match. I was up in the tunnel warming up to wrestle the round of 12 against Earl Hall, and I actually felt the building shake. I was standing, to anybody that's been in those tunnels, you have a really limited view of what's going on the floor. There's so many bodies in front of you, and I could only see one section of crowd, and the section of crowd I could see was full of black and gold, and it was close to the center of the arena. So I'm looking at it, and just in my mind, Gilman's on the mat. I thought it was the Iowa section. So I'm back there warming up, and Coach Santoro, Coach Hughes were with me, and I'm standing there, and I just heard this enormous roar, could feel the tunnel shake, and I turned around and looked at Hughes. I went, well, looks like Gilman's going to the finals. About 30 seconds later, both guys come running through. Gilman comes tearing through the tunnel looking less than pleased, and here comes Zeke looking like it's Christmas morning, right? And as they kind of go walking by, myself, Santoro, and Hughes are all kind of confused looking at each other. And we turn around and look at the board, and we realize what happened. And, with all the hubbub of everything going on, I'm supposed to be getting ready to wrestle. I'm digging my way to the front of the tunnel and realize the whole arena is still on its feet about a minute and a half later. And the section of the crowd that I was looking at turned out to be the Mizzou fans, not the Iowa fans. So that there's a match, obviously rooting for Zeke as a fellow Pennsylvania native, but a memory that I'll never forget simply because I've never felt an arena explode the way that it did that night in St. Louis.
Mason, I wish I could tell you on Friday night that I had my wrestling shoes on still, and I was in the tunnel too, getting warmed up to go out there and wrestle. But unfortunately for me, I was tucked way back into the crowd with the street shoes on and a 64-ounce Gatorade as the career had just come to an end. But I will agree with you there. I was in attendance for the Penn State-Ohio State football game back in, I believe it was 2005 or 2004, whatever year Penn State won the Orange Bowl, I guess it was, and they upset Ohio State in Beaver Stadium, who was ranked number 1, and that was the loudest sporting event I had ever been to in my life. I couldn't hear for hours after that, and I think for a wrestling tournament, Zeke pinning Gilman was right up there with that in terms of noise level. And it's also interesting that just now 2 years later, the guy who beats Gilman again, this time in the semis again, is Darian Cruz, another Bethlehem Catholic kid. So, coincidence or not, I don't know.
Hey, Bethlehem Catholic's got Thomas Gilman figured out. That's what that tells me. At least in the NCAA semis.
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking.
All right, and joining us now is Dalton Macri. Dalton's a graduate of Canon-McMillan High School down in the Pittsburgh area, where he was a multiple-time state medalist and a state champ for the Big Macs. He was a national qualifier as a freshman up in Ithaca for the Cornell Big Red, and has recently made a move from Cornell to the University of North Carolina. So, first and foremost, Dalton, thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so, obviously the first thing is the move from Cornell to North Carolina. Kind of walk us through that process for you. What kind of drove your thought process, why it was that, you felt that was the best move for you.
Yeah, I was just up in Ithaca and really wasn't happy there. Didn't really felt like I fit in really well with the crowd there. Not so much the wrestling team, just like the general student population was pretty much the main issue. And I started feeling it affecting my wrestling, my performance and my desire and drive and love of the sport, really. And I've always been the kid, that's loves the sport. And, I wrestle all the time and don't complain about it and just have a great time doing it. And I felt, going into practice, I was kind of dreading it. Didn't really want to be there, and I just felt like I needed a change. I needed a fresh start, something to, reset my mind and get me back, to what actually get me back to the style and the mindset that got me, into college wrestling, Division I wrestling. So I, just wanted that fresh start, and it was really between Pitt and UNC, and both are great schools. I visited down here 2 weeks ago, I think it was, and I just kind of fell in love with it. The coaching staff is amazing, and the place, the atmosphere down here is just, it's great.
Dalton, your first year, you came in as a freshman at Cornell. You made the NCAA tournament. I think you had like a 20-11 record, which is obviously pretty solid in Division I, especially for a freshman. And I was just looking through your NCAA bracket. I actually remember your first-round match. You upset the 11 seed Ronnie Bresser from Oregon State. At the time, I was actually sitting on Media Row, and I was working for Old Dominion, and Bresser, obviously from Oregon State. They have it alphabetically assigned up there. So I was sitting next to Oregon State's SID, and I remember him, rooting vividly for Bresser that match. And obviously, you're a PA kid, so you wrestled on the same Dapper Dan team as my brother. So I was pulling for you, and I remember you pulled off that upset. You almost had Utsi there in the round of 16, and almost made it into the quarters. And I mean, you won another match in the Conties, lost to another All-American by a point. I mean, it looks like you had a pretty solid season and a pretty solid NCAA performance for a true freshman. Do you think you didn't wrestle, to the best of your ability? Like, do you think you were capable of more, essentially, is what you're saying? Or was it more just things off the mat at Cornell?
Like that, my freshman year, I was kind of, wasn't really up there for that long. I'd gray shirted, and it really didn't start affecting me too bad until, this past season when I wasn't really wrestling as much because I had surgery on my thumb. It started to creep in then, and it really hit me because I didn't have wrestling as kind of an outlet for my emotions or anything like that, and it really took a toll on me this past year. But as for my freshman year, I mean, I'm happy with it. I'm not really content with it. I think that I could have done a lot better. I was close to winning a lot of those matches, and I think I was definitely good enough to All-American my freshman year. But yeah, I just wasn't in the cards that year, and it should have kind of drove me to get better and work harder, and it was over the summer, and then all of a sudden I kind of hit a little bump in the road with my injury, and then everything started creeping in, and I just didn't want to go to practice. I really wasn't doing the right things. Wasn't really showing up for practice, even though I was hurt. I was kind of just sitting in my room, and that's when it really had an effect on me. Not so much my freshman year, but this past year.
So you've mentioned your injury a couple of times. You had surgery on your thumb. Take us through just the process of when and how that happened, and then the following months as far as recovery, rehab, getting yourself back on the mat, and like you said, kind of finding your way, and now in the past couple of months, finding your way back into being happy within the sport of wrestling.
Yeah, so I did it in the first match, the first tournament of the year. I had an avulsion fracture in my thumb. Kind of just got jammed in the mat in a weird situation, and avulsion fracture is pretty much the ligament ripped off the bone, and it chipped off the bone with it. So it was a pretty extensive surgery, and the recovery time was putting me in around end of February, pretty much a week before the conference tournament, EIWA tournament, and I don't want to like badmouth any of the coaches or anything like that at Cornell or talk bad about them, but really they kind of pushed me into coming back before I was ready, mentally more so than physically. I felt like I physically could have competed, but mentally I wasn't ready, and I was kind of dead set on trying to get a medical out of everything, and taking the time. I really didn't think the NCAA would have a problem with the medical since it was my clearance was a week before the conference tournament. I really didn't have time to get back and get prepared to wrestle. So I tried to come back because I'm kind of stubborn, and I wanted to wrestle. More so I was like missing it. I was missing being on the mat, and I tried to come back too early and partially tore it again, so it put me out even longer. And that's when like my not issues, I wouldn't say, but that's when not the coaches, but Coach Cole and I started kind of butt heads a little bit. And it's not the blame's not on him, because it's on me too, because I could have told him and been straight up with him and said I didn't want to wrestle, but I made that decision, and that's when everything started to kind of make sense to me about I kind of started putting the puzzle pieces together. I wasn't really happy there, and that didn't help at all with my love for the sport, because I was kind of pushing myself too hard, and I just got set back again. So I was kind of frustrated with that, and that's when I kind of decided that I needed that fresh start, and I needed to get back to my roots pretty much, and get back to what got me there. So I decided to pick a place where I felt like I could do that. And at UNC, I know like a lot of people have like compared my wrestling style. Like obviously have not accomplished nearly as much as Tony Ramos, but they've kind of compared the styles a little bit, and we kind of wrestle similar, kind of that hard-nosed style, takedowns on your feet, pretty much wrestling from the neutral position. And I just saw that, and I talked to Tony, Coach Ramos, about it, and we found out, I think that I could be really successful here, and that this is the place where I thought I could be most successful. So that's why I made that decision. Besides, the Chapel Hill is an amazing place.
Yeah, I was going to ask you next about that. You got Tony Ramos on staff there. You got Coleman Scott, who's obviously originally from the Pittsburgh area, Waynesburg, so he's a Pittsburgh guy. How much of a connection did you have with Coleman, or was it mostly a Tony Ramos thing?
It's kind of a combination, and additionally, AC Headley is also down here, and he's been a Quest member at the club for a long time, and we kind of became like really, really good friends throughout middle school, and stayed pretty much best friends throughout high school, and kind of lost touch a little bit. Everyone's busy going to school and wrestling. Everyone's plate's pretty full. So we kind of, we still talked every now and then, but when I was thinking about my decision, I was figuring out where the heck I was going to go, and I looked at UNC, and I don't know why I even decided to look into it, but I talked to AC and see what he thought about it down here, and he told me he loved it and stuff, and I just decided to get my release to try to contact the coaches down here and see if they would be interested in having me. And as soon as I got my release, I started talking to Coleman, Coach Scott, and we kind of hit it off right away. He kind of understood where I was coming from. He understood the mindset. Coming from Southwest PA, everyone's not really super like Ivy League type kids, so he definitely understood that. So we hit it off right away, and I was getting my transcripts and everything sent down to him, and he didn't even have everything, all the stuff that he needed to make sure that he could bring me down here on a visit. And he texted me and said, "Hey, I have a flight on hold for you for tomorrow at 2:00. He's like, "Is that good?" He said, "I'll hear in the morning back from admissions and everything." And he said, "We'll get you on that flight if everything's all good." And everything was. And it moved pretty fast, which is kind of scary when you're making a big decision, but it was kind of good too. I couldn't sit around and overthink things too much. So I didn't really get to talk to Tony too much until I got down here, and then we hit it off right away too. He was actually my host when I visited Iowa, one of my officials. He was actually my host, and we started talking about that, and then we just kind of hit it off, like I said. And so I think it's a combination of that, both coaches, and having AC down here is one of my best friends, so that that doesn't hurt at all.
Yeah, Mason, before you jump in with the next question, I got to say AC Headley is one of my favorite kids to follow on Twitter. As I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I'm going to compile a list of the top current PA college wrestlers to follow on Twitter, and AC Headley's going to be on that list. So good to hear that. Good to hear that you're good friends with him.
He definitely has some quality tweets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the next question I was going to ask him, obviously Dalton, you and I have known each other for a long time. I know your background as far as being born in Wheeling, West Virginia, and moved into Pennsylvania, and being a kid that definitely not exactly from the city, not from a place like you said, like in Ithaca, New York. Much more of a down home type of kid, just the lifestyle that I've always known you to live. And I was just wondering if the fact that Coach Scott down at North Carolina, to anybody that's never been to Waynesburg, Pennsylvania, it's pretty far out there. It's a good place, but there's not a whole lot going on in Waynesburg. So, and then Coleman obviously lived in Stillwater for a long time, as part of the Oklahoma State program in different capacities. Did the fact that both of you guys come from that background and, I'm sure share interests outside of wrestling, did that really come into it?
A little, it's always nice to have something in common with your coaches, something you can talk about outside of wrestling, so you're not always in that like wrestling mindset. Like, you can kind of like distance yourself from it and take a little break every now and then. So yeah, I mean, that really helped. We talked, obviously, the whole time I was here, we had a lot of conversations, and, some of them were wrestling and some of them had nothing to do with wrestling at all, which was nice. It was good to actually, get to know him and talk with him just on a personal level.
Dalton, leave it to a guy from Reynolds, Pennsylvania to come on a podcast and tell you that your hometown has nothing in it. Am I right?
Yeah, right.
Hey, look, I never once claimed Reynolds has anything in it, because it doesn't. But
Waynesburg embodies a small town, that's for sure, yeah.
Yeah, well, we don't want to keep you on here all night, Dalton, but anything else you want to say here before you sign off, just about, what's to come for this UNC wrestling team next year, what the fans can look forward to? I know, like you said, you got you and AC Headley, and I'm sure there's going to be a couple other PA kids down there, not to mention you're led by one of the all-time PA greats, Coleman Scott. So what can the fans look forward to seeing this upcoming season for the Tar Heels?
Oh, we're going to have a great team. Really excited. We have a lot of guys that, that maybe weren't, the big guys on the team last year, didn't have the best results, but, we're wrestling in the room, and those guys are tough. They just have something maybe it's mental, maybe it's, some factor that's kind of keeping them from achieving, their goals. And this team's going to be great. I mean, our recruiting class is very good. Everyone has the same mindset. It's going to be great. Look forward to placing high at nationals as a team, and, having some individual champions as well. One more thing too, I just wanted to mention, I want to thank Rob Cole, my former head coach from Cornell, for giving me the release and being helpful in the process. And, the whole entire coaching staff, Damian Hahn, and one of the hardest people to leave, Mike Gray, it was a difficult discussion with Mike, but and I kind of put it off way too long. But, there's no hard feelings between us, so just wanted to mention that. And thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, hey, thank you, Dalton. Thank you for taking the time and, giving us some candid answers, bud.
Appreciate it. Yep, no problem.
All right, well, take it easy, brother.
All right, guys.
All right, everybody. And our next guest on the show here is Kellan Stout. Kellan was a state champion for Mount Lebanon High School in the Pittsburgh area. He started his career off out at Penn State, but has since transferred this summer to the University of Pittsburgh. So, Kellan, first and foremost, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, no problem.
So, obviously the, kind of the elephant in the room is making the move from Penn State, a program that, in the last 6, 7, 8 years doesn't really need any introduction or explanation. Kind of just take us through the last 6 months to a year and really what's gone into making the move for you from Penn State to Pitt, and why you felt that it was the right decision for you.
Yeah, so the whole process was brought to my attention around December. I was out at Penn wrestling in that tournament. I forget what it's called, whatever it's called. And my dad held a volunteer position at Pitt for a while, so he had a previous relationship with the head coach at the time, which was Coach Peters. And he mentioned to my dad about, so I wasn't starting at the time. It was still early in the season, but, McCutcheon was wrestling pretty well. It didn't really look like, much was going to happen as far as my standing in the team. And so it kind of brought to my attention at that point, but I kind of compartmentalized it at the time. I still had hopes and that I could, break the lineup and things. So I didn't really put much thought into it. But come the end of the season, and even a little bit before the season when the postseason started, I started to think about it more and decided it was, a real option for me. And I thought I could contribute on, another team. And I thought the next step for me as far as development was actually starting, because you can get better, training with guys, but I think there is something to be said for actually getting out there and competing. And I thought that was the next step for me, so the whole coaching change went down. That was a little bit confusing for a second because it was pretty unclear, who was going to get the job. Santora's name was thrown around, and even Pitt, even higher up than that, there was an AD change. So she was new coming in. Roselli's name was thrown around. So there's a couple big name guys, so it's kind of exciting, as a guy looking to make a change and come back home, which was Pittsburgh for me. But I was super excited when Gavin got the job. I've known him, for a little bit, a little bit indirectly, but, I know him, I'd say hi if I saw him, and, I knew he could help me. He's pretty unorthodox in his style, and he's good at some positions that I'm not. So I was super excited when he got the job. In Penn State, I know I got better. That room is, as far as concentration of talent, I don't know, you're going to be hard pressed to find, a better place in really the world. Personally, that, making the change was best. So, I went for it, and, I just kind of dove head first, and everything's been going great since, just working out up here. And
Kellan, you talked about, obviously Keith Gavin gets the head coaching job, and he's right up your alley. I mean, he was a 74-pounder in college, has been wrestling on the freestyle circuit in the recent years, is right around your weight class. So obviously you'd have to think that would be a great selection of a head coach for you personally. Talk a little bit about not only Keith, how you think he can make you a better wrestler down at Pitt, but also some of the other workout partners you'll have on the team, like Ryan Solomon up at heavyweight has been a stud for them, couple-time national qualifier, and then you've got some other really tough guys thrown in there in the upper middle weights. Nino Bonacorsi coming in as a true freshman. Just talk a little bit about the workout partner potential you have there at Pitt.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gavin, even, he only stopped competing a couple years ago, and he was in the thick of things with, Ruth and John Reeder and, all those total studs, who are ultra successful at, their respective, universities. So he has that like fresh experience, and, that you can even tell, wrestle with him because he's, he can go with you, and, sometimes you have to wrestle with a coach. If he's a little bit older, they're still good, but they can really only give you like, a little bit of time. Whereas Gavin goes the whole practice is still, big crap out of you. As far as workout partners go, that was the big thing. When I was making the move, me and my parents talking, they were like, workout partners this. But Solomon's a great partner. He's a great asset. He's a little bit big, but, I can still roll with him. Nino, Bonacorsi, he's really, really tough. And I've known him. He's from like the town over from me. So we would do like joint practices in the past. So I'm pretty familiar with him, and then his brother as well, who went to Pitt, graduated a couple years ago. But he's really tough, and I think, I think he's going to redshirt this year, but he's a medium impact type guy. I think, I think he can, really make some noise at this level. So, my workout partner situations, I think it's solid. And from my time at Penn State, I've come to realize that the workout partner thing really isn't like the end all be all. Whereas it's super important to have, people around your weight. You can make do with what you have, and I think there's development to be had. Even wrestling with maybe some lesser competition where you can actually you do things that or apply things, and fit things into your style. Wherever it is. And even a guy like Zach Bruce, who is up at 97. He was down to 84 towards the end there. He's a tough partner. With a college level experience. So even as far as like match management things, I can learn from everybody. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the whole process.
Yeah, you mentioned your family, Kellan, and the fact that, like you said, Nino's from the town over from you. Is the fact that Pitt's close to home, did that play into the decision at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted, there was a few places that were thrown around that I kicked around initially for the whole when I decided to make a move. But I really wanted Pitt to work out. I think so Gavin getting the job, and and compound that with it being my home. I'm 5 miles from Oakland. My house is, so it just is a really recipe for success. So that way, my family. I'm I have a couple little brothers who are just getting into high school now. I have a little sister. So it really helps having them being able to make matches and having an active part in my life. Whereas somewhere far away, it might be a little more sparse and spread out. So definitely, I really wanted. If I was going to make a change, I wanted Pitt to work out, and I'm glad it did.
Kellan, how long have you been down at Pitt so far working out, and how have you feel like you've been adapting so far, to the team and this, the summer workouts you guys are doing, and how's that been going so far?
It's been going really good. So the whole, the little paperwork stuff, I had to get my physical, so I was home, and working out, like open room type stuff, but I wasn't technically transferred yet, but I got all that stuff handled. So I've been lifting with the team, and I've been working out with the team and stuff. So it's been going really good. It's a little bit of an open time, it's as far as structure goes, and with guys in and out doing internships and, having jobs and their own schedules and whatnot. But I'm home. I'm kind of commuting right now. So it's a little bit of a pain, but I'm just, happy. I'm just my plan was to, wrestle 97. So, I wanted to gain some weight. So I've been really focusing, on the weight room and my diet and stuff. So I'm just doing my thing. It's going really good though.
Well, it's good to hear, man. I guess the last thing really would be, anything that, you want to give us as far as what to expect this coming season, not just from yourself individually, but from the Pitt program, what to look for moving forward, or, just anything you want to say?
I think nothing but good things. I think Pitt is on the rise. And that's been being said for years, with the concentration of, talent there is in the WPIAL and even, extending out a little further. And I think with guys like Gavin and Lee, some new faces, some new people, and they're both great recruiters. I seriously think that, the Pitt program is going to make some noise these upcoming years, get, landing some more local guys and, making Pitt a more viable option for, these guys that are going to Penn States and the Okie States, like the local guys, so, I think the program's definitely looking upward. And as for this year, there's a handful of pretty tough guys that I think are, capable of hanging with anybody, so, I know for myself, I expect to, be competing with the big dogs. So, I'm just really excited, for the team and for myself and, just for everything. It's happening quickly. And these last couple of years, I'm really looking to put myself out there. So it's going really good.
Well, good, man. That's as always awesome to hear. And, thank you for coming on, taking the time to come on here and talk with us and open up to us a little bit about your decision and making the move.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to talk to you guys.
Yeah, Cal, luck this year. We wish you the best, and we really think big things are coming from Pitt as well, as we'll talk about later in this episode. So thanks for coming on, and best of luck to you in the program this season.
Thank you very much. See you guys later.
Take it easy.
All right, so we just spoke to Dalton Macri and Kellan Stout, two really good Pennsylvania wrestlers that are making moves to new colleges, and we wish them all the best. We really appreciate them coming on the show and giving us some great answers and some great insight into their decision-making process and to their future in college wrestling. Mason, for our last portion of the show, we want to dedicate the last portion of every episode that we have this summer to just focusing on a Pennsylvania college wrestling team for next year that the fans can look out for. Big things are coming for these teams, and just give a brief preview of what they can expect to see from these teams, maybe what guys will be in the lineup, what guys are returning, what new recruits are coming in, what guys are coming off Redshirt, all the kind of stuff like that. So, Mason, you and I decided today for this first one, we want to focus on Pitt obviously, new head coach coming in, Keith Gavin, who was an NCAA champ for Pitt and a finalist the year before. New assistant coach Jordan Lean, a former NCAA champ from Cornell, who spent most of his coaching career so far at UVA. And then a two-time All-American lightweight from Michigan, Connor Utze, is now going to be a volunteer assistant. And as you mentioned, Drew Headley is still sticking around as an assistant there at Pitt. So they have an outstanding coaching staff, and obviously they're located in arguably the best city in the entire country for the sport of wrestling, in Pittsburgh. And they're in the ACC, which has become one of the toughest conferences in the nation. So absolutely no reason why Pitt can't be a powerhouse. Mason, what are we looking forward to seeing about the Panthers next year?
Well, obviously you touched on the coaching changes. The first thing from having talked to Coach Gavin and, Drew Headley was one of my coaches at Lehigh for a period of time, and having talked to those guys and as well as some guys in the program, they're just excited about, a culture change and to get that program back on track. And it's one we always hear referred to as a sleeping giant. And everybody around the program, as well as, I live in the Pittsburgh area now, everybody in the entire WPIAL, the entire Pittsburgh area, people are just excited about the future of Pitt wrestling. So that's one thing that you can't really put a value on. But as far as recruits, looking at schools, as far as the way the kids within the program come to practice every day, it's awesome to have so much excitement surrounding Pitt wrestling. And honestly, for the first time in my life, at least that I can remember, as someone who grew up an hour north of Pittsburgh, I can never remember this type of excitement being generated by Pitt wrestling and the future of it. So that's obviously extremely exciting. And as far as what to look for from Pitt next season, I think first of all, you almost have to start with guys like Dom Fories, who's a three-time national qualifier, he's coming up on his senior season. He's been in the round of 12. He's a guy that is just nipping at the heels of being an All-American. He's proven that he's good enough. He has wins over guys that are All-Americans. To go along with that, Taylor Bermani, who was a couple matches away from All-American last year, was an ACC champ. LJ Bentley has been at the national tournament, has some really high-quality wins at the Division I level. Combine those guys, along with Ryan Solomon at heavyweight, a Pennsylvania native, Nick Zanetta, another Pennsylvania native at 141 who placed at University Nationals, as we mentioned prior, who placed at Midlands last season, a guy that has proven he can compete at a high level within Division I wrestling. When you combine the guys they already have on the roster with some of the recruits that they have coming in, headlined by Nino Bonacorsi, KJ Fenstermacher, both of whom were high medalists in AAA states the past couple of years, it's definitely an exciting time for Pitt wrestling, and I think that it may take some time, as it always does, to really change the direction of a program, but I think the trajectory of the program is going nowhere but up.
I completely agree with you there. So like you mentioned, you got LJ Bentley at 25, a two-time national qualifier, I believe. Dom Fories, like you said, at 133, one of the most physically imposing 33-pounders out there. Every year he's ranked in the top 10, and like you said, he's been in the blood round a couple times. He's just so close to getting on that podium every year. I have confidence that he'll get it his senior year. I really hope he does. Nick Zanetta, a guy who's been solid for Pitt all throughout his career, but this just about a month ago at University Nationals places 5th or 6th in a really tough bracket that Dean Heil, a two-time national champ, didn't even place at. So Nick Zanetta had some really good wins in that tournament. He's obviously making improvement, and you wonder, this new coaching staff, how much of an impact will they have this soon already? We don't know. But, Taylor Bermani, as you said, at 157, kind of burst on the scene late and almost All-American in a kind of wide-open 157 weight. And then worth mentioning, Tishawn Campbell, a Pennsylvania state champ, transfers out of Pitt and goes just across the border over to Ohio State. Could be a big loss for them at the 165 range, but Jake Wenzel, another former PA real superstar, coming in there at the 57 or 65 slot. He's no slouch for sure. He's going to do good things for Pitt. And then, as you mentioned, we got Kellan Stout, who we just interviewed, transferring in. Ryan Solomon up at heavyweight. And then guys like Nino Bonacorsi, who, at any other time in Pennsylvania history, could have easily been a Pennsylvania state champ, had some hammers in his brackets over the year. But he's the younger brother of Nick Bonacorsi, who is obviously a standout for Pitt. And then guys like Austin Bell and a couple other big-name recruits, as you mentioned. KJ Fenstermacher coming in. He got third in a loaded 132 weight this year. Colin Cronin from Upper Darby, a two-time PA state placer, who's another guy who, you look at history, he could have been a Pennsylvania state champ, but he runs into guys like Sasso and Pletcher and stuff like that. And then one of my guys, Cumberland Valley guys, Will Caldees, who I believe is a four-time PA state qualifier who was always one match away from getting on the podium, but took third at NHSCA Senior Nationals. Has been at Fargo, won a bunch of matches, has always been close, and I've actually been training with him the last few weeks, getting ready for Fargo. So I just think Pitt has a tough recruiting class, and then there was a couple other AA guys. I think even a Reynolds kid, Mason, you discussed. So they've got a promising future, that's for sure. How they'll develop the talent, we can't wait to see.
Yeah, it's like I said, it's an exciting time to be around Pitt wrestling. If you look at some of the guys that this coaching staff has had their hands on, in Drew Headley's time at Lehigh, he was there. He was in the corner for Darian Cruz to be a true freshman All-American. He and I were workout partners the entire time that he was at Lehigh. He had a big hand in Randy Cruz and Lake Gardner guys. He had his fingerprints were all over the way we wrestled and a lot of the things that we did. And, he comes back to Pitt, obviously. Dom Voorhees, LJ Bentley, Nick Zanetta, those guys have greatly improved since he's been there. If you look at Keith Gavin and Jordan Lean, their time at UVA, producing guy, in both of their wheelhouse, in a Nick Sulzer, or over at Ohio State, a number of those guys through the middle in Ohio State's lineup in his time with the Ohio RTC. And then just last year down at Oklahoma, he and Coach Roselli did some good things down there. So it's a coaching staff full of guys that, though they're young, if you understand the time frames and the programs that they've been with and which kids they've had their hands on, they're all proven to be able to take kids to higher levels and to succeed on Friday night and Saturday at the national tournament. And at the end of the day, that's what you want. That's what you build a program around. That's what you strive for, is to have guys wrestling on Saturday afternoon in the medal rounds and have guys wrestling Saturday night on the stage, which all four of the coaching staff did. At bare minimum, wrestled in the All-American round and stood on the podium. All four are All-Americans, with two of them, Coach Gavin and Coach Lean, being national champs. So it's a staff full of proven winners, and it's going to be exciting to, like you said, see how they develop talent and just infect a winning attitude into the Pitt wrestling program.
Mason, you would probably agree with me on this one. Back when we were competing, you were at Lehigh, I was at Old Dominion, but, guys we would run into from Pennsylvania colleges, guys we'd run into that we had wrestled our whole life growing up in the state of Pennsylvania. Obviously, they're the opponent, they're the enemy at the time, but now that we're done, looking back, and even if we're still fans of our respective colleges that we competed for, for me personally, I was sitting with Jeff Upson at NCAAs up there in the nosebleeds on the media section, just rooting for every PA kid like crazy. We didn't even care what school they wrestled for. So it's awesome to see a team like, Pitt get this new infused energy and this new rebirthing, almost, like it seems. And, you just hope for good things for them. You hope for good things for all of these respective programs that we're going to take a look at in our future episodes as well. And even the kids from Pennsylvania that, have gone off to colleges in other states. Like I myself was one of those. You just root for these kids, and that's what the PA Power, that's what Jeff Upson's all about. That's what PA Power is all about. Just, supporting these Pennsylvania kids as best we can. So like we said, each episode we're going to run through another team, but today took a look at Pitt and really good things coming for them. We really hope, and I really believe we will see that. Next episode we'll take a look at another program, not sure which one yet. At this time, we just want to let our fans know, if you guys, you have any specific topics you want us to touch on or any questions, feel free to go ahead and fire away at us on social media, at Beck Diggity on Twitter, or at Warren Triz on Twitter, or any social media that you have. Go ahead and send us your suggestions, send us your questions, your topics you want us to talk about, especially in these summer months where there's not a whole lot of wrestling action per se. Feel free to send us what you have. And Mason, as well as I do, we're in our washed up wrestling career days. You know, we're not only physically fragile, but also emotionally fragile. So let's keep the criticisms to a minimum if you can. I mean, if you really want to make fun of us, go for it. I mean, I have thick skin. But yeah, just send us your feedback. Let us know what you want to hear, and we can't wait to just give you guys what you want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything the Chins want to send our way, by all means, reach out, poke fun at us. Wouldn't be the first nor the last to do so. So we hope that we can get this podcast really rolling and reach out to all those Pennsylvania college wrestling fans and just Pennsylvania wrestling fans in general, and just promote this great sport and the best state for it in America.
Yep. That being said, do us a favor, give PA Power Wrestling a follow, give our podcast a retweet or share it on Facebook, whatever, and spread the word so we can keep generating the buzz on the Pennsylvania wrestling circuit and on all these super talented, great kids that we got coming out of the Keystone State. So I'm Tristan Warner, joined by co-host Mason Beckman, and we'll see you guys next time. Keep it classy, Pennsylvania wrestling fans.